You smile at the man watering his green lawn next door and assume he wants you to succeed. In his 1933 book, Down and Out in Paris and London, George Orwell describes a starving writer living in a filthy boarding house. The writer watches a fellow lodger hide a piece of stale bread under a dirty mattress. The lodger refuses to share the dry crust with the writer sitting across the dark room. He guards the crumbs with absolute cold paranoia. This brutal hoarding behavior was not an isolated incident in a historic slum. It is the exact psychological mechanism governing the quiet street where you sleep right now. Proximity to poverty terrifies the human mind. People fear that financial ruin is a disease capable of spreading through the thin walls of a building. They offer small scraps of polite conversation to cure their own guilt. They do not want to pull you up. Fear breeds silent isolation. You felt this exact mechanism last winter when your bank card declined at a local coffee shop. The person standing behind you in the line stepped forward and paid the small bill. With a tight smile, you thanked them and watched them hurry out the heavy glass door to avoid any further conversation. They bought their own comfort by masking their deep fear of your empty wallet. Pity is polite disgust. Pity keeps the starving man fed, but survival is not the same as competition among equals in the deep mud. In her 2001 book, Nickel and Dimed, Barbara Ehrenreich works as a waitress in a cheap diner. She watches the tired kitchen staff mock a young dishwasher who studies a heavy textbook during his short break. The staff throws wet rags at the boy and insults his ambition. They demand he stay in the dirty water. When your net worth hovers near zero, your peers share your daily struggle to pay the heavy rent. If you attempt to learn a new skill or save your small wages, you break the unwritten social contract of shared misery. Your self-improvement makes their stagnation feel like a deliberate personal failure. They attack your progress to protect their own fragile egos from the harsh light of reality. Ambition triggers the hungry mob. You encountered this exact crab bucket mentality last year when you decided to skip a loud weekend party to study for a heavy certification exam. Your friends mocked your dedication and called you obsessed. They sent endless text messages demanding you abandon your dark desk and join the loud crowd. They wanted you to burn your biological youth to validate their own terrible habits. Growth requires losing your friends. The hungry mob punishes the dreamer at the bottom, but a much quieter war begins when the dreamer acquires a heavy mortgage. In his 1922 novel Babbitt, Sinclair Lewis describes a middle-class real estate agent hosting a dinner party. The agent buys expensive cigars and heavy silver forks to impress his neighbors. He watches his guests examine the silver with cold, calculating eyes. The guests compliment the heavy forks while planning to buy better ones the next morning. The guests do not hate the real estate agent. They are locked in a silent, physical battle for absolute dominance over the local hierarchy. When your net worth sits in the normal middle tier, your neighbors treat you as a direct competitor for limited social oxygen. They smile over the wooden fence and ask about your recent kitchen renovation. They are not making polite conversation. They are taking a precise inventory of your financial progress. Comparison is a silent war. You played this exact game last month when the man across the street parked a brand new truck in his driveway. You stood at your front window, holding a cold cup of coffee. You felt a tight knot form in your chest because his shiny metal machine made your older vehicle look like absolute garbage. You spent the rest of the day researching car prices on the internet. You let a stranger dictate your mood. The silent war of comparison escalates into rigid aesthetic policing when the neighborhood gates finally close around the massive houses. In his 1956 book, The Organization Man, William White studies an affluent suburban enclave outside a major city. A new family paints their front door a bright red color. The wealthy neighbors do not knock on the door to discuss the choice. They deploy a heavy homeowners association to issue massive legal fines until the door becomes a dull gray.
When you approach $500,000 in net worth, the community enforces absolute visual conformity. Your neighbors treat you as a massive physical risk to their own property values. They watch the height of your grass, the brand of your heavy car, and the specific clothing your children wear. Any deviation from the rigid aesthetic standard threatens the collective illusion of high status. They use heavy legal contracts to force your absolute obedience. Conformity is a beautiful cage.
You felt the cold grip of this neighborhood surveillance last spring when you left a heavy trash can on the curb an hour past the approved time. An anonymous neighbor placed a harsh warning note on your heavy metal mailbox. You looked down the quiet, perfect street and realized that none of these smiling people were your actual friends. They are unpaid prison guards protecting the value of their own cells. The lawn hides the prison. The beautiful cage breaks the moment one man acquires enough heavy capital to buy the entire quiet street. In his 1875 book, The Way We Live Now, Anthony Trollope describes a massive financial speculator who buys a grand estate in the English countryside. The old aristocratic neighbors despise the new money. They refuse to invite him to their quiet teas. They watch his massive carriage pass their stone walls with absolute bitter hatred in their cold eyes. When your wealth crosses the $1 million threshold, you mutate from a peer into a massive physical target. Your old neighbors no longer view you as a human being with normal flaws and a beating heart. They view you as a walking bank vault that owes them a massive debt for your good fortune. The friendly smiles disappear and are replaced by a heavy, suffocating expectation. They wait for you to distribute the heavy gold. Success makes you a resource. You experienced this uncomfortable shift the day you mentioned your massive corporate bonus at a neighborhood barbecue. The casual laughter died down, and the physical distance between you and the other guests expanded. By the end of the night, a man you barely know pulled you aside to pitch a terrible business idea. He looked at you like a starving dog looking at raw meat. Money severs the human root. Surviving the desperate hands of your old friends requires building a massive physical fortress far away from the hungry crowd. In his 2012 book, Plutocrats, Chrystia Freeland details a wealthy industrialist who buys a vast estate outside the city limits. The industrialist constructs a high brick wall topped with sharp iron spikes around the entire perimeter. He hires armed guards to patrol the massive iron gates. He transforms his home into a maximum security compound in the dark forest. He builds the massive wall because the people living on the outside are no longer his neighbors. They are a hostile crowd that wants to climb the brick and steal the heavy silver. When your wealth enters the tens of millions, your presence destroys the fabric of any local community. You cannot borrow a physical tool or chat over a short fence. Expensive lawyers and private security manage every single interaction with the outside world. Wealth demands extreme paranoia. You drove past one of these massive compounds last week on a scenic highway. You looked at the heavy black gates and the dark security cameras pointing toward your car. You wondered what kind of life happens behind the thick stone and the silent trees. You assumed the people inside were having a constant massive party. They are sitting in total silence, watching the camera feeds. The gold builds a lonely cell. A fortress protects a rich man from the town, but a different mechanism protects the absolute titan from the nation. In his 1995 book, The Winner-Take-All Society, Robert Frank observes a massive billionaire building a house on a quiet beach. The billionaire decides the other mansions block his view of the blue water. He buys the 3 massive houses next to his own and tears them down to plant flat, green grass. He physically erases his neighbors.
At the level of hundreds of millions of dollars, the concept of a neighbor becomes an unacceptable physical nuisance. The Titan does not want to hear a lawnmower or see a strange car parked on the public street. They use their massive capital to buy a massive buffer zone of pure silence. They treat the surrounding people like annoying insects that can be sprayed with a heavy hose and removed from the heavy board. Isolation becomes the ultimate luxury.
You read an article about this behavior when a famous technology founder bought every single property surrounding his main estate. You felt a flash of deep anger at the absolute arrogance of destroying normal family homes just to ensure pure quiet. You imagined what it must feel like to possess enough paper money to alter the physical geography of an entire city to suit your specific mood. Power erases the inconvenient crowd.
Emptying the room is a matter of real estate, but ruling the world requires leaving the physical ground entirely. In his 2018 book Moneyland, Oliver Bullough observes a billionaire arriving at a private airport in a foreign country. A black car drives onto the dark tarmac and takes him straight to a massive private helicopter. He never touches the public ground or breathes the public air. He lives in the cold sky above the city.
At $10 billion, you don't share a property line with another human being. You share a border with a sovereign nation. The billionaire buys entire islands and vast mountain ranges. They treat the public like a distant species of loud animals that must be managed and contained from a massive height. They do not interact with the local community at a town hall. They buy the local government. Space is the final gated community.
You saw this absolute detachment on the news when a massive corporate owner launched a metal rocket into the dark sky. You watched the massive fire light up the screen from your quiet living room. You realized that the man in the rocket does not care about the potholes on your street or the crime in your city. He abandoned the human tribe to live among the cold stars. Money kills the human root.
The financial matrix promises that accumulating massive wealth will force the world to love and respect you. The dark reality is that every dollar you stack builds another heavy brick in the wall, separating you from humanity. You trade the warm, chaotic reality of human connection for the cold, sterile perfection of the silent vault. The people who reach the absolute top of the massive pyramid look down and realize they are completely alone in the freezing wind.
The neighbor watering his green lawn does not exist in the world of the absolute Titan. The Titan employs a massive landscaping corporation to water the grass in the middle of the dark night. The Titan pays massive sums of paper money to ensure he never sees the men who cut his grass or clean his heavy windows. The elite engineer their entire physical existence to avoid accidental eye contact with the working class. Insulation creates total blindness. You spend your finite biological youth trying to climb this exact heavy ladder. You buy the expensive shoes and the heavy car, hoping to impress the people living on your quiet street. You believe that reaching the next financial tier will finally secure the authentic admiration of your peers. You do not realize that the higher you climb, the more hostile the environment becomes. You are fighting to enter a room where everyone secretly hates you.
You sat on your front porch yesterday and watched the neighborhood cars pass by in the dying light. You calculated the exact price of every vehicle and measured your own physical worth against the heavy metal. You let the massive status game dictate your internal emotional state. You surrendered your profound human dignity to a rigged competition designed to keep you permanently exhausted and deeply insecure. You feed the machine with your own fragile ego. From the starving man in the dirty room to the Titan in the silent helicopter, the mechanism remains exactly the same. Money does not change the fundamental darkness of the human heart. It only magnifies the deep paranoia and the absolute desperation for physical control. The poor man guards his stale bread against his hungry roommate. The billionaire guards his massive island against the hungry nation. Fear is the universal currency.
The system requires you to remain blind to this massive psychological trap. If the working class understood that extreme wealth destroys authentic human relationships, they would stop running in the massive hamster wheel. They would stop buying the heavy luxury items that fund the massive elite empires. The elite need you to believe that the gold brings absolute peace. They sell you the heavy illusion while they sit in their lonely, silent fortresses. The rare individuals who map this exact architecture do not play the massive status game. They accumulate heavy assets in total silence and refuse to change their physical behavior to impress the neighbors. They drive the old car and wear the plain clothes while their massive investment portfolio grows in the dark. They prioritize absolute physical freedom over the cheap validation of the anonymous crowd. They become invisible to the hungry predators.
The next time you step out of your front door and wave to the man watering his green lawn, you will see the absolute truth of the interaction. You will recognize the silent war of comparison and the heavy aesthetic prison that traps your entire street. You will stop measuring your finite human life against the shiny metal toys sitting in the concrete driveway next door. You drop the heavy weight of their expectations. The neighbors will continue to police the borders of their beautiful cages until the day they die. You will step off the massive treadmill and reclaim absolute control over your own biological mind. The historical operators shared their hidden knowledge only with those who stepped into the quiet shadows to look. Something on this screen is the modern version of that exact act of seeking. Today, you are now on the side that sees.